Let me paint a scene for you. A moment so shocking it could only happen in real life. Picture this. A white officer full of authority openly disrespects a black man. He doesn't just speak down to him. He spits on him. Yes, you heard that right, he spits. But here's the kicker. What this officer doesn't know, what no one in the room suspects, is that the man he's disrespecting isn't just anyone. He's the new police chief. Now imagine the tension, the silence that falls over the room as the truth starts to sink in. It's the kind of moment that leaves you holding your breath, waiting to see how it all unfolds. How does someone recover from such an act? What happens when the tables turn so dramatically? This isn't just a story about disrespect. It's a story about justice, redemption, and the most unexpected twist you could imagine. Let me introduce you to the man at the heart of this story, Richard Nelson. A name you'll want to remember, because what he does next defines his legacy. Richard isn't just any man. He's a black man who's worked his way up through the ranks in a system that wasn't designed to make it easy for him. He's the embodiment of perseverance, stepping into a role that comes with its own set of challenges. A new police chief ready to lead, but not in the way anyone expects. On this particular day, Richard chooses to keep things low-key. No uniform, no badge, no fanfare. Just a man in casual clothes, walking into a precinct that he now commands. It's a calculated move, one that sets the stage for what's about to unfold. He's there to observe, to understand the culture of the department he's about to lead. But what he doesn't anticipate, or maybe he does, is the raw reality of the biases that still exist within those walls. And that's where the story takes a sharp turn. Richard, unassuming in his casual attire, becomes the target of blatant disrespect. The officer who spits on him sees only a man he deems unworthy, not realizing the power and authority Richard holds. It's a moment that lays bare the deep-seated issues of prejudice and entitlement, but it's also a moment that sets the stage for one of the most satisfying turnarounds you'll ever witness. This rewrite keeps the focus on your chosen title, emphasizing the themes of racial bias and its consequences, while building a compelling narrative that draws the viewer in. Would you like to expand on a specific part, or add additional sections? Let me set the stage for you. Richard Nelson is standing there, calm and composed, as Officer Daniels, a man who clearly thrives on exerting authority, starts to throw his weight around. From the moment Richard enters the precinct, Daniels' attitude is hostile. It starts small, sarcastic remarks, condescending questions, the kind of behavior meant to demean and belittle. But Richard, he doesn't flinch. He stands his ground, quiet, observing. It's as if he knows that Daniels is digging his own grave, and all Richard has to do is let him keep going. And then it happens, the moment that makes your blood boil. Daniels spits. Not just words this time, but an actual act of disrespect. The kind of act that strips away any pretense of professionalism or humanity. It's raw, it's ugly, and it's meant to humiliate. But here's where things get interesting. Richard doesn't react the way you'd expect. He doesn't yell, doesn't lash out. Instead, he stays calm, eerily calm. His restraint, his silence in that moment, speaks louder than any words could. It's the kind of composure that only comes from someone who knows the truth, who holds all the cards, and is just waiting for the right moment to play them. As the tension in the room builds, you can feel it. Everyone watching knows something is about to happen. But no one, not Daniels, not the other officers in the room, has any idea just how big of a twist is coming. And then the moment arrives. Richard steps forward, and with a voice as steady as his demeanor, he delivers the words that change everything. "I'm Richard Nelson, your new chief of police." The room falls silent. You can almost hear the collective gasp, the disbelief hanging in the air. And Daniels? His face says it all. Shock, embarrassment, and a dawning realization that he's just made the biggest mistake of his career. Richard doesn't stop there. This is his moment to make a statement, not just to Daniels, but to everyone in the room. He talks about respect, how it's not something you demand, but something you earn, about accountability, and how it's the cornerstone of leadership. He doesn't raise his voice, doesn't point fingers, but his words hit harder than any shouted accusation ever could. Daniels, meanwhile, looks like he wants the ground to swallow him whole. The power dynamic has shifted so completely, so irrevocably, that it's almost hard to believe just moments ago, he was the one trying to assert dominance. For everyone watching, it's a lesson, a moment that underscores the importance of humility, of treating everyone with respect, regardless of who you think they are. And for Richard, it's a victory, not just for him personally, but for everything he stands for: justice, integrity, and the idea that true power lies in how you wield it, not in how loudly you claim it. When the dust settled after that confrontation, the real work began. Richard Nelson wasn't just there to make a point or claim a title. He was there to lead, to rebuild, and to set an example that would ripple through the department and the community it served. Daniels? He faced immediate consequences. His suspension wasn't just a punishment, it was a statement. A clear, loud declaration that the toxic behaviors that had been swept under the rug for so long would no longer be tolerated. Richard's actions sent shockwaves through the precinct. For some, it was a wake-up call. For others, it was a reckoning. But Richard didn't stop there. He wasn't interested in being a figurehead or a temporary disruptor. He wanted real, lasting change. His first move? Sitting down with every officer in the department one by one. He didn't just want to hear their stories. He wanted to understand their motivations, their fears, their biases, and their hopes. And then there was Officer Reyes. Reyes had been in the department for years and had grown comfortable with the status quo. At first, he resisted Richard's new approach. But over time, something shifted. Maybe it was Richard's authenticity, his willingness to listen, or his unshakable commitment to fairness. Whatever it was, Reyes started to see things differently. One day he approached Richard visibly nervous. "I've got a lot to learn," he admitted. It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. Richard didn't push. He simply nodded and said, "Learning is where change begins." That conversation marked the start of a transformation, not just for Reyes, but for the entire department. Policies were revamped. Accountability became the new norm. And gradually the culture shifted. What had once been a toxic environment began to grow into something better, something healthier. It wasn't perfect, change never is, but it was progress. The real victory wasn't just in the department. It was in the streets, where the community began to feel the impact of Richard's leadership. One moment stands out, a small but powerful reminder of why Richard fought so hard. It was a quiet afternoon when Richard saw a young boy standing outside the precinct. The boy was hesitant, clutching a worn notebook. When Richard walked up to him, the boy looked up with wide, curious eyes. "Are you the chief?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Richard knelt to the boy's level and smiled. "I am," he said gently. The boy hesitated, then asked, "Are you going to make things better?" That question hit Richard harder than anything Daniels had thrown at him. It wasn't just about one officer or one department. It was about restoring faith, about showing the next generation that they could trust those who wore the badge. "I'm going to try my best," Richard promised. The boy nodded, his grip on the notebook relaxing just a little. "I believe you," he said simply, before turning and walking away. That moment stayed with Richard. It wasn't just about leading with integrity. It was about leaving something better behind. Something that could inspire hope in even the smallest, most vulnerable members of the community. Through his actions, Richard didn't just confront bias or demand accountability. He showed what true leadership looks like. In a world where the odds were stacked against him, he turned a moment of disrespect into a catalyst for change. The boy's belief in him? That was the ultimate proof that change was happening, not just in the department, but in the hearts and minds of the community. And that's the story of how one officer's racial bias didn't just backfire. It sparked a transformation that no one could have seen coming. Looking back on that first year, I can honestly say it wasn't easy. The challenges were constant, some expected, others blindsiding. Changing a culture rooted in years, even decades, of certain behaviors is like steering a massive ship. It takes time, patience, and an unrelenting sense of direction. There were moments when I wondered if the fight was worth it. When the resistance felt too strong, the skepticism too heavy. But then, I'd see small victories. An officer standing up for what's right in a tense situation. A community member who finally felt safe speaking out. A young recruit who didn't carry the baggage of the past, but instead embodied the potential of the future. The precinct is far from perfect. I won't pretend otherwise. But it's undeniably different. There's a spark of something new here. A belief that things can change, that respect and accountability aren't just words, but principles we can live by. One moment stands out above all. It was a precinct-wide meeting, months after I first stepped into the role. I looked around the room at faces that had once met me with skepticism, even hostility. And there they were listening, not just to me but to each other. Voices that had once spoken over each other were now collaborating, finding common ground. I knew then that we were on the right track. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a future where the mistakes of yesterday didn't have to define tomorrow. As I reflect on everything that's happened, I can't help but think back to that boy outside the station. His question, "Are you going to make things better?" still echoes in my mind. It's a question I carry with me every single day, a reminder of why I do what I do. And if I could tell him anything now, I'd say this: we're trying. We're not there yet, but we're trying. And with every step forward, I know we're moving closer to the answer you deserve. This journey isn't just about one man's bias or one department's flaws. It's about something bigger, about proving that change is possible, even when it feels impossible. And for anyone watching, I hope this story shows that no matter how deep the cracks run, the foundation can always be rebuilt. Because sometimes the most unexpected outcomes come from the moments that challenge us the most.